Welcome to Developmental Psychology. I'm your professor, Ryan Keith. Today, I want to talk about a transition we make, not just from childhood to adulthood, but a transition from using the word will to using the word should, and why that's problematic. As developmental psychologists talk about kids, they use the word will. We will go from crawling to walking. We will go from babbling to using words. We will go from whole hand grasping to two finger pinching. No matter which theorist we talk about, we're pretty much using the word will. We are making predictions about how kids will work. But when we move to adulthood, as I'm going to show you with some of the theories discussed in your readings, we move to talking about should, how people should operate, and how people should be, and what that means if they are or aren't doing what we predict they should be doing. Also, why this is problematic. I want to start, give me a second here to get a slide up. I want to start by talking about somebody we've already talked about a bit, which is Erik Erikson. If you remember, Erik Erikson had 8 stages of development, and it always had to do with this conflict between two things. If we look at adolescence, last week's topic, right? This was a conflict between identity formation versus identity diffusion and role confusion. The idea being that in adolescence, you need to establish a sense of who you are, and if you aren't, you're kind of at sea and you're lost. And if you don't do this, you're going to have a hard time doing what we need to do in early adulthood, which is to establish a sense of intimacy with other people. Erikson specifically meant like we develop close friendships and learn to get along with other people as adults, but he also meant like practicing intimate romantic relationships, maybe even getting to living with somebody, right? And in this way, you can see that he is predicting that people need to do this, that you need to start getting in serious relationships and practicing having a romantic partner so that you can do what you need to do next in middle adulthood. That in middle adulthood, what we need to be doing next is practicing generativity. Generativity means specifically having kids. And this gives us our first sense of should. That in this way, Erikson is predicting a trajectory that you go from figuring out who you are to how to get along with other people to getting married and having kids. This is problematic because there are a lot of people who are not broken human beings who don't want to follow this trajectory. Whether we're dealing with stuff like fertility issues or simply somebody who doesn't want to have kids or doesn't want to be in a committed, monogamous, heterosexual relationship, there are a lot of people who are left out of theories like Erikson's that he's predicting that you should follow this or else you are having problems that are going to follow you into middle and late adulthood. You're going to end up experiencing despair because you don't have children to keep you young. This is deeply problematic because it assumes that there is this trajectory that fits absolutely everybody in American society. I still like some of Erik Erikson's ideas, the idea that there are these conflicts that we deal with, and that ultimately, if we don't settle these conflicts, there are certain opportunities we won't have in the future. Maybe we don't need to learn to be romantically intimate with everyone, but learning how to form responsible, stable adult relationships, that's really good for your mental health. And if we don't figure out how to do that, we might have a harder time later on in life, right? If we move on from Erikson and talk about Daniel Levinson's work, Daniel Levinson established a theory called seasons of a man's life, which again is kind of problematic in its own way. And if we focus on specifically his early adulthood and transition from early to middle adulthood phases, what we see is that Daniel Levinson predicted that, especially over the course of adulthood, your life goes through these periods of rough transition and upheaval where you're figuring stuff out, and then you settle into a certain kind of lifestyle for a while. Think about like 5 years of transition followed by 5 years of stability. And even though I really like this idea of how that might work, we see a similar kind of expectation from Levinson that in early adulthood, we go through this transition where we make these initial choices, like you start a new job, you go off to college, you start getting training, you learn to adult. And then from there, you settle in this like middle and late 20s into like making choices. They say initial choices in love. In this sense, Levinson does not mean like you start dating. He means you're establishing these serious long-term relationships and you're starting to practice your long-term occupation that'll become a career. You start to make your choices and invest in your lifestyle. Maybe you buy your first house. If it sounds like this is like kind of crazy that in your 20s you might do something like figure out who you're going to marry, start your family, buy a house, start your career, it's because Daniel Levinson's ideas were developed in the post-war 20th century in the United States, where especially white middle-class Americans had the economic stability to be able to do these things. We've talked a lot about people like my grandfather, who with a bachelor's degree had a really good job, that in his 20s out of the military, he was able to establish a certain kind of lifestyle on a certain income. For a lot of us now, we're not just making our initial choices in our careers, maybe we're making our second or third choices in our careers. Even if you're making your initial choices, maybe you don't plan to be in a career for 35 years, maybe 5 or 10 years before you move on to the next thing. From there, once we hit our 30s, we make this rough transition where maybe we're going from living our single lives or our lives with our partners to starting our family lives. Maybe we go from a job to a career. We go from doing things on our own to having a family. We go from being able to do whatever we want to pretty much staying and living at home, right? Again, this is this really like I think about like movies like Failure to Launch that focus on people not lining up with this kind of lifestyle, and about how these movies have aged really poorly over time because there are so many of us who, because of financial reasons, are doing things like living at home longer. More than ever, we see people waiting to have children, not buying houses, and living with their parents, not because we're broken human beings who don't know how to grow up, but because there simply isn't the money to do stuff like have kids and buy a house and move out. And this, more than ever, we're learning to understand is not just that the kids don't have money, that the parents don't also. Many of you, I would guess, are living at home and in doing so, contributing to your family's income and welfare. And you feel pressure to not just move out on your own to go get an apartment in Gainesville because you have to support your family members in order for everyone to be able to survive. Levinson's problem here is that he predicts, again, he prescribes a certain kind of lifestyle and life trajectory that simply isn't reasonable now. That for us in our lifestyle, but even for people then, people who lived in multi-generational households who didn't have a ton of income, even people from minority backgrounds didn't have the college and career and income opportunities to live the lifestyle that Daniel Levinson predicted. Like a lot of our ideas, then, we can say that Levinson's problem is a cultural one. Even if we like this idea of like you have a rough transition and settle in, I mean, I can tell you guys, if you've had kids, you know this, like big rough transition as you have kids, and then you start to settle in to knowing how things work. And then those kids will transition on to school, and there's big unsettling all over again. Big unsettling as you transition to college, you figure out how to college, and then it's time to leave college and do something brand new all over again. Life is made up of these rough transitions and then learning how to master your situation. So there is stuff that we can take away effectively here. The last theorist I want to talk about here, and then I promise we'll be wrapping things up, I want to keep it under 10 minutes, is a guy named Robert Havok. Robert Havok is the most should guy of them all. He prescribed more than anybody with a model that he called developmental tasks, that specifically like society had these jobs we needed to do, that as young adults or people in middle adulthood, we need to do things like start a career and select a mate and live with a person and start a family and manage a home. And you can tell that this structure here, that like in early adulthood, you start a family and start a job and start this civic lifestyle, you are like launching your adult life and learning to adult, but even in this really established structured way, like you've already got your plan. You're not just figuring out how to do laundry and keep stuff from going rotten in your fridge. You're figuring out how to like balance a career and a checkbook and a family. And then in middle adulthood, he doesn't even wait like to middle adulthood to have kids. By the time you're in middle adulthood, like you're hitting 40, you are launching your children into the world, meaning that you have to have kids between 18 and 22 to make that happen. You're having your 3 kids before 30 in order to make this lifestyle possible, right? In this way, Robert Havok has been accused of establishing kind of like a father knows best or a leave it to beaver kind of a mentality, that that's what everybody needs to aim for. And that people who didn't want to have these kinds of committed relationships, people in the LGBTQ or minority communities from international backgrounds, or people who don't have a ton of money, like they simply didn't have access to this perspective. And this is problematic, not just because he's explaining a certain kind of lifestyle, but he's pretty much saying that these are the tasks you need to fulfill. And if you don't, there is something wrong with you and you will pay a developmental price later. I like this model because it's cautionary and it explains, like it gives us a perspective into how these models can seem good and then turn out to be obsolete. And we can even see problems in the times in which they tried to function then. We can keep that in mind even as we look at our own models today, that they may not work perfectly well, and that there were a lot of ideas we had about like maybe the jobs that we had, and now maybe our perspectives will be more about how we live from home and commute to work and stuff like that. I don't know. But I really like to look at these models mostly as cautionary tales about what does and doesn't work, and about how well models like this stick around or don't. So that pretty much wraps it up for our short videos this week. If you have questions about these models of development and what they mean, or the assignments I need you to be doing, or class, or anything, just reach out to me. I guarantee that if we stick together and remain flexible, we can make it through this class successfully. If you have questions about this, about resources, or about getting through the quarantine successfully, feel free to reach out to me and I'll do my best to get you in touch with somebody who can help you out. If you want to talk, I'm available during my office hours at officehours.page.link/meet, or you can call or text me pretty much anytime at 352-327-8259. I can't guarantee that I'll be able to pick up or respond to your text right away, but I'll hit you up as soon as I can. So yeah, stay in touch and we'll make it through this. This is developmental psychology, and even now, in the middle of a global crisis and pandemic, I'm your professor, Ryan Keith. I can't wait to talk to you guys more about how everybody is crazy and broken, and we're really bad at this whole development thing.